I'm sure most of us have been aware of leftist cancel culture, name calling, and demonization for years. But now, suddenly, 150 celebrity writers and academics have supposedly joined our ranks. They recently signed an open letter decrying censorship. Ironically, they seem oblivious to the fact that many of them are responsible for engaging in their own forms of silencing, that they created cancel culture. And just as ironic, now those celebrities are being attacked by the younger members of the cancel culture monster that they helped create. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. You know, a few weeks ago, I wrote a piece and shot a video covering the BBC's memory holing of one of the most hilarious episodes of England's top comedy series, Fawlty Towers. Evidently, the comedy of co-creator, writer, and star John Cleese is too potent for the Victory gin-fueled proles. And I noted that co-creator and star John Cleese tweeted his chagrin and his view that it was the result of the reactionary right in charge of the BBC. I also pointed out that Mr. Cleese was incorrect, that the people attacking speech and silencing his work were of the same leftist mindset as those who recently tried to jail Scotland's Count Dankula, otherwise known as Mark Meechan, and doing so simply for a spoof video that he made to tweak his girlfriend. Well, with the July 7th Harper's release of an open letter signed by nearly 200 high-profile professors, novelists, journalists, and even a world chess champion, a letter decrying cancel culture and warning of the consequences of speech policing, that blindness to the source of the censorship problem was put on display again. Now, this isn't to say that the signers are uniformly left collectivists, for they include academics such as Harvard professor Steven Pinker and University of Chicago's libertarian Deidre McCloskey. But the list is so full of old guard progressives as to make one want to hand them some mirrors, just so they can see that they themselves created the cancel culture they now supposedly decry. And even as they do that, they're shifting their worry to include Donald Trump, who hasn't had a hand or even a finger in fostering the growth of this culture over the past 50 years. Now, in the Harper's piece, the signers identified the problem, offering laudable points. We uphold the value of robust and even caustic counter-speech from all quarters, but it is now all too common to hear calls for swift and severe retribution in response to perceived transgressions of speech and thought. More troubling still, institutional leaders, in a spirit of panicked damage control, are delivering hasty and disproportionate punishments instead of considered reforms. Editors are fired for running controversial pieces. Books are withdrawn for alleged inauthenticity. Journalists are barred from writing on certain topics. Professors are investigated for quoting works of literature in class. A researcher is fired for circulating a peer-reviewed academic study, and the heads of organizations are ousted for what are sometimes just clumsy mistakes. And they correctly cite the results of the identity politics censorship. Whatever the arguments around each particular incident, the result has been to steadily narrow the boundaries of what can be said without the threat of reprisal. We are already paying the price in greater risk aversion among writers, artists, and journalists who fear for their livelihoods if they depart from the consensus or even lack sufficient zeal in agreement. The trouble is that many of the signatories who decry what the cancel culture is doing are themselves guilty of creating it. A perfect example is signatory Gloria Steinem, former editor of Vogue, left feminist, and outspoken collectivist, who has also openly derided academics who might want to publish research on cognitive and behavioral differences between men and women. In his ABC special, Boys and Girls Are Different, John Stossel approached Steinem to ask her about studies showing possible biological bases for cognitive and behavioral differences between males and females. Steinem's curt and abrupt response was, "Don't even think about doing that kind of work." The very act of wondering if there are natural gender-based differences is one sourced from implicit sexism. To wit, she told him,
"It's really the remnant of anti-American crazy thinking to do this kind of research."
That was 1995. And of course, now she's all in favor of intellectual freedom. Yeah, right. When, based on interesting supportive data, Stossel asked her, "Aren't women in general better nurturers?" she replied curtly once more, saying,
"Aren't women in general better nurturers?"
No. Next question.
No curiosity, no discussion, flat out cancellation. Cancellation of the entire line of inquiry with an added vibe of offense just for having to suffer through the sexist question. Now she's supposedly horrified by 21st century cancel culture. Or perhaps if she had recognized her own censorious identity politics attitude and apologized decades ago, she might not look like such a monumental hypocrite. Perhaps if she had understood that she was utilizing and contributing to an even older, poisonous atmosphere of postmodernist critical studies, reckless demonization, and censorship, the kind of growing censoriousness that writing legend Ray Bradbury decried and which he noted was pushed mostly by the left, especially at colleges, perhaps Ms. Steinem and her guilty associates would not have been targeted themselves by the very censor mob they helped create. Indeed, as I and other liberty advocates have warned, as it was with Dr. Frankenstein, the postmodernist monster she and other identity politics forerunners created has now turned on them, cannibals, eating their own. Just days after the publication of their letter, the signatories were targeted for canceling by another team of identity politics pushers. In their July 10th, a more specific letter on justice and open debate, this new group of leftists offered, without any sense of irony, a letter shutting down the first group's call for open debate, saying, in part, the signatories, many of them white, wealthy, and endowed with massive platforms, argue that they are afraid of being silenced, that so-called cancel culture is out of control, and that they fear for their jobs and free exchange of ideas, even as they speak from one of the most prestigious magazines in the country. And of course, in comically hypocritical fashion, many of the signatories to this open letter, decrying the establishment signatories of the first open letter, are, you got it, part of high-profile establishments themselves, including Washington Post op editor Karen Ataya and Tufts University lecturer Carrie Greenridge. It never ends. And that's why I and many others have tried to stress the intellectual nihilism of identity politics. In fact, of all politics that do not simply leave people in peace. In their long-standing attempt to redefine the words of others and demonize political opponents, postmodernists have embraced the idea of what might be called lingua ex nihilo, which becomes lingua atavistica, lingua solipsistica, and finally lingua non-lingua. No language at all. Unless, of course, there is one central authority dictating how people will live. And have no doubt, everybody, this is the intent of many of these pushers of identity politics and cancel culture. They might disagree with one another about who is the most authentic minority deserving the microphone, but they tend to have one common enemy of the day, the right, whom they and even John Cleese mistakenly target as the big anti-speech threat. Now, where were they when Jordan Peterson stood up for free speech in Canada? When Alex Jones was booted from YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Apple's App Store. When Zach Voorhees presented the Google YouTube blacklist. When the Australian government declined Lauren Southern's visa. When YouTube removed Stefan Molyneux, and now Twitter's just done the same thing. It seems as if many of these free speech advocates were silent when those they saw as rightist, even libertarians, were maligned and silenced. Perhaps that's because despite the reams of evidence to the contrary for decades, they still mistakenly believe that the real enemy of free speech is somehow the right. Indeed, the first group of open letter signatories offered this in their first paragraph. The forces of illiberalism are gaining strength throughout the world and have a powerful ally in Donald Trump, who represents a real threat to democracy. Well, first of all, democracy is never synonymous with individual rights. It stands for the majority trampling the rights of the minority. Second, one can openly debate whether Donald Trump's public outcries against social media and big tech censorship, by the way, that MRC-TV has experienced quite often, whether those are too harsh, too weak, or just right. But until he recently issued his executive order for his Justice Department to look into the Section 230 rules governing internet websites and provider immunity from liability, he had taken no action to shut down newspapers or other media outlets. Sure, he had openly criticized and argued with reporters that he didn't like.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN.
But he did not engage in using, for example, the Espionage Act to try to stifle reporters and whistleblowers the way that Barack Obama did, something that he tried more times than all presidents combined since the act was passed in the early 20th century. The evidence is clear and voluminous. The process of canceling speech for political advantage becomes ceaseless, creating a nihilistic downward spiral that might stun even Trent Reznor, and it leads to a destruction of truth, to nothingness, as does all collectivism. And the one thing that replaces it is central political authority, which is precisely what the cancel culture seems to desire. Hey, thanks so much for watching, everybody. So many things happening. Remember, head over to MRCTV.org to find out what the team is doing. Visit us on Twitter. Visit us on Facebook. We'll see you on YouTube. See you in the comments section. And keep coming back and telling your friends. Remember, this is a crucial time. A lot of people are being booted from all sorts of social media, and we rely on you to be part of the team. For MRCTV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.